You are listening to our podcast, and we thank you for joining us here today. We've got our Halloween edition. We're joined by Bob Mobley, Jim Tallman, Eston Dickerson, and myself, Andy Wiggins. And we're going to do a movie, but we're going to do some other things as well. Our movie today is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. So this is a movie from 1948. And we're going to assume that a lot of people don't know about it. So first, a summary of the plot, spirit read by our cast. Bob, would you start us off?
Count Dracula, Bela Lugosi, in league with the beautiful but diabolical lady scientist, Lenore Albert, needs a simple but pliable brain with which to reactivate Frankenstein's creature, Glenn Strange.
The ideal brain belongs to the hapless Lou Costello, whom the lady doctor woos to gain his confidence and lure him to the operating table. Lawrence Talbot, played by Lon Chaney Jr., better known as the Wolfman, arrives on the scene to warn Costello and his pal Bud Abbott of Dracula's nefarious schemes.
Throughout the film, Costello witnesses the nocturnal rituals of Dracula and the monster, but can't convince the ever-doubting Abbott until the climax in Dracula's castle, where the comedians are pursued by all three of the film's monstrosities.
As a bonus, the Invisible Man, voiced by an unbilled Vincent Price, shows up for all the excitement. So let's talk about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. First of all, just a little bit about the title, because personally, as I watch this movie, it's like, first of all, they don't meet Frankenstein at all. Dr. Frankenstein's not in this movie. They barely meet the creature. It's more like they meet Dracula and the Wolfman. Did you guys have a similar reaction? Is there something strange about the title to this movie? Eston, what'd you think?
I think they just put, maybe Frankenstein was probably the most famous movie maybe at that time, and they just slapped it on the title and said, give us your money. Because, he's not in it. The monster's barely in it. But it's also like, I don't know, when I was growing up, I thought Frankenstein was the monster.
Yeah.
I wonder if that was even back then a thing where people just thought the monster's name was Frankenstein.
I think that misconception probably starts early. Bob, what do you think about the title of the movie?
Yeah, I think I don't know enough about these Universal monster movies and which one was more popular at the time, which one at that time. I presume from the title that Frankenstein was just seen as the more marketable monster, and that's why they titled it that way.
I like that you bring that up. It's good for us to say here that this is a Universal movie. Universal famous for not only these Abbott and Costello comedies, but of course for the Universal Monster series. And Eston, I don't even know. You gave me a list. Was it like 30 different movies?
I think it was in the 40s.
Maybe even in the 40s.
Over like 30 or 40 years.
And some of their biggest money makers, and the images that we have, the popular images of monsters that we have, the Wolfman, the Mummy, the Frankenstein creature, and Dracula, pretty much all come from these Universal movies. And those are the monsters that are appearing in this movie. Some, in many cases, the actors that started those roles. Jim, what did you think title-wise? Was it misleading to you?
I don't know if that's, but I think it's kind of cute. I think they're trying to go with the cute.
Yeah.
Because Abbott Costello, they're cute. I really can't come up with a better word.
Yeah.
Need a thesaurus. But I think it's trying to show we're kind of kitschy here. They're not being serious.
Yeah.
And even the characters in the movie, they are serious characters doing not very serious things.
Yeah.
And I think the title kind of points to that.
The original title of the movie, the working title of the movie was Brain of Frankenstein. And they decided that actually would be misleading because they had already gone through Son of Frankenstein, Ghost of Frankenstein, House of Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein. And so to call it The Brain of Frankenstein would have made it seem as if it was much more in the vein of those serious movies. And this isn't exactly. Now, it's also not quite what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be completely goofy in terms of what the monsters did. But Jim, you kind of point to that. The monsters are actually quite serious in the movie. It's Abbott and Costello that end up doing all the silly stuff. Well, let's talk genre just in general here, and let's talk about horror movies. So we keep throwing around this word monster. It's a word that I've heard ever since I was a kid, but really until we decided to do this podcast, I hadn't thought about it very much. What's that word mean to you? What's the word mean in general? Give me some thoughts on monster. What do you think of?
Well, I think to me, monster is that which we don't understand.
Okay.
That we are scared of what we are ignorant of. And I think a great example of monster having two little girls, I've seen Beauty and the Beast 30 times. And the beast is synonymous with monster, and in the end, you find out he is not beastly. The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
You are scared of him because he's beastly. He's a monster because you don't know him, but then in the end, you find out that he's anything but that. And I think we kind of see that in this movie too, where the Wolfman is a bad person, but in the end, he's saved. He's the one that saves them from Dracula. Frankenstein, not so much, or the
Creature.
beast that. He, not so much in this movie, but in a lot of the stuff I've read and seen of Frankenstein, of the monster, that he is not a monster. He is almost childlike, and that he is simply the result of science gone wrong. Again, science, something at this time especially, would be something of more of an unknown. So to me, the idea of monster is simply the unknown and trying to figure out what that may be.
Bob, do you like that definition, that a monster, that the term monster, the idea of monster, represents something that we don't understand and therefore fear?
Yeah, it's the monster. The monster under the bed is the thing that we don't see and that we don't know about. The monster in the closet, right? That's what our kids are afraid of. They don't see the monster. They probably couldn't describe the monster if you asked them to, but there's a monster in the closet. And Jim mentioned Beauty and the Beast, and that just reminded me, and the monster in the closet reminded me of Monsters Incorporated.
Okay.
This really changes the whole definition of what a monster is, right? Monsters Incorporated is where the monsters are actually afraid of the children. And also, the characters on Sesame Street are called monsters. Yeah. They're all monsters, including the Count. And so I think it's an interesting. There's an interesting thing that is done in terms of children's literature and children's programming, children's television, which kind of takes the scary out of the monster.
Eston, pick that up.
We talk about the scary monsters. That also, last year we watched the movie Godzilla vs. King Kong, which is also about a different style monster. But they also, throughout the series of Godzilla, the first one's very serious. You should be afraid of Godzilla. He's force of nature, and then as they go along, he's kid friendly. He has a little son who's like a Gumby blob. I think monsters now don't hold any weight because I think we see real life monsters on the news everywhere you go. Like the real monsters now are like the characters on CSI who are eating people's brains or something. I don't even know what they do. But I think the fantasy monster has no real appeal, I feel like.
Yeah, we do call serial killers monsters. I mean, that's the first word that usually comes out, when they talk about when they catch someone with, bodies in the basement, that person's a monster, right? That's a real monster.
Yeah.
So we were talking right before we went on the air, and we had looked this up, and it says that the word monster derives from the Latin monstrum, which means an aberrant occurrence, usually biological, that was taken as a sign that something was wrong within the natural order. Well, wouldn't it be true that there's always something wrong within the natural order? So, Bob, you've kind of expanded it, not just biologically, but psychologically, as you bring in, and Eston, you bring in the idea of the serial killers. So, in a sense, would it be fair to say that in some ways we're all monsters to one extent? What do you think? I mean, is there anyone who's completely perfect within the natural order?
Well, it's that whole, throwing stones in the glass house. None of us are perfect, and there's something about every single one of us that makes us monstrous. And if you took, the monstrous deeds that we have all practiced, you put them all into one person, and that's when you get a Dracula, or you get a Frankenstein or whatever. So he is almost, I think, a combination of all of the misdeeds of humanity.
Psychologically, I think that you can also say that it depends on how far you deviate from the norm.
Great.
And what damage you might be doing to others and to society. So we may all be monsters, but the degree of our monstrosity might be measurable.
So my next question is, why are monster movies perennially so popular from the 19-teens until today? So for 100 years, these movies have been incredibly popular. They don't always take the same form. They've kind of changed their color and their characteristics. But is that part of it, that we are seeing these deviations within ourselves? Is that reading too much into it? Or what other factors are there? Eston, what do you think? Why, as pop culture, Why are these monster movies so popular with people?
I think part of it is we just like looking at messed up stuff, like things that are like. This is gonna sound wrong, but you see somebody on the street who looks different. Part of your brain wants to stare at that person, right?
Yeah.
In a movie, it's perfectly okay to stare at this person who looks different and acts different, and you're not going to be judged or called a bad person because you want to gawk a little bit at what's going on.
Might be the same psychologically. It might be the same allure that we have for reality television. It's a safe way to watch something go bad.
I agree. I think it's the fight or flight instinct. So generally, if you're in a situation of fight or flight, if you fight, there could be negative repercussions to that. If you're watching a horror movie, you are accepting the fight instinct, but you are not accepting the negative repercussions of the fight instinct. So when you're watching, a Saw movie, they're terrible movies, but they're modern day horror movies.
Yeah.
And you know that you are fighting that character. And in the end, you know you will be safe. So it allows you to get a little bit outside of your comfort zone, but close enough to your comfort zone that when the 90 minutes is up, you can go be safe. And the characters that you saw, disemboweled were the ones that felt the negative repercussions of that fight that you both put up against that character.
Kind of going off a tangent there. When did they turn from this is a scary Frankenstein monster wandering through the village to I have you trapped in my basement and I'm cutting off limbs?
Well, let's do this. Let's actually kind of take a look at the different genres and how they've developed. But as we do that, let me throw out a working definition for a good horror movie and then see if we can apply it to those different eras of horror movies. What I hear you guys saying, I think, is that there are a couple of elements to a good horror movie. One, a good horror movie is going to tell us something about ourselves. A good horror movie is going to point out to us either how far we deviate from the norm or how close we are to that norm based upon looking at an exaggerated occurrence. But at the same time, a good horror movie, Jim, is going to do exactly what you said, and it's going to provide that adrenaline rush, yet in a safe kind of way. So if we put those two things together, are we comfortable with that, or are there other elements that we ought to be considering for a good horror movie before we proceed?
I think a good horror movie, for me, shows less and scares more.
Okay.
And I think there are so many different kinds of horror movies, and I brainstormed a few of these.
Great.
Friday the 13th, that's a slasher movie.
All right.
That's a horror movie that's a slasher movie. I think
Put that
Saw
on the timeline. Where are we looking at a slasher movie? 70s, late
early
70s,
80s,
early
right?
80s.
I think it was early 80s, yeah.
Okay.
I think they started around 1980, 81. So Friday the 13th is a slasher movie. I presume Saw is a slasher movie. I've not seen that.
I'm gonna say a different category for that. I'm gonna say that's almost more like a torture
It's a torture
horror
movie.
movie. That's something
Okay.
more than a slasher movie.
I think I also this one came up as Jim was talking. The Nightmare on Elm Street movie.
Yeah.
That's one that shows more tension and
It's a modified slasher movie.
It's a modified slasher movie because it threatens and threatens and threatens, and then
It's like
it
a
builds.
mystical or mythological.
It is.
There's something. There's a
Supernatural.
supernatural slasher movie, maybe.
Would Alien
unique.
be a horror movie?
Yeah, that's
Sci-fi
the question. That's a good question.
That movie has
sci-fi horror. Yeah.
got some scary parts. in it.
Scares me.
Yeah.
I'll tell you
I
that.
liked how you talked about show less and scare more. To me, the ultimate show less, scare more movie was the Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
You don't see anything, and
that's a
you
good
are on the
point.
edge of your seat, freaking out the entire time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, they snicker at that movie, but it was a major, major deal when it came out, and it was all about how much money it made, even though it cost like $50,000, something ridiculous to make.
Yeah.
And talk about a horror. That's exactly what that movie does. It's
Yeah.
all about the unknown.
That's how those Paranormal Activity movies, at least the first couple, were.
Yeah.
You know something's going to happen, and nothing happens, and you are freaked out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm creating a timeline here, and I'm putting the torture horror movies in the 2000s. That's now.
That's about right.
Supernatural slasher movies in the 90s, slasher movies in the 80s, and then in the 70s, I'll throw this out as a theory. I think those are religious horror movies. I think those are like
Rosemary's Baby.
The Exorcist and all that. So I'm going to call the 70s religious horror
Okay.
movies. We good with that? I'm going to skip the 60s and come back to it. The 50s is too easy. 50s is like irradiated,
Them.
yeah, big bug kind of stuff. What's the 60s? Is that Godzilla? Is he a horror movie?
I think the first one.
He's a monster, I guess.
The first one, but that's more of a disaster.
Yeah.
More than horror. I think.
Godzilla is nuclear, post-nuclear. I mean,
Yeah.
Godzilla comes about because of nuclear testing.
Right.
Right.
But you wouldn't call it a horror movie. Like there's parts where you could be afraid, but it's not.
So what's a 60s horror movie? I guess the Hammer horror films, those are basically British remakes of the Universal.
Yeah.
We return to Frankenstein and Dracula. Every one of those is remade in Great Britain with Christopher Lee and all of that. Well, and then back to the 40s. The 40s has to be the Universal that we're looking at now. 30s and 40s, as a matter of fact.
How about what about the special effects era of the '80s, like The Thing,
Yeah.
the John Carpenter, I guess The Fog, although that's almost that's a
Call that-
suspenseful horror
Yeah,
as
I'd
well.
call that a horror movie.
Yeah.
Well, let's return. Let's get specific now with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Is it a good horror movie by any definition?
No.
Any aspect of it good horror?
No.
No.
Jim, what do you think? Any aspect of it?
I don't think that was the point of the movie.
I understand
Yeah.
that.
So that if that's the case, then no.
The only thing I'd submit to you guys for conversation, my daughters couldn't watch this movie. It'd scare them to death.
Yeah.
It would absolutely scare them to death. So while I agree that it certainly wasn't the intent, it's a different kind of thing, I think that still just the presence of these things that we don't understand to a child's mind, even with the silly stuff going on, it could be scary.
And we always talk about perspective. We have all been there, done that. Like anything that might have been scary in any of these Universal movies has been surpassed or done or changed or reinterpreted 100 million times. So there's really nothing new under the sun there.
That's a
for
good
us.
Yeah. I like that point. I mean, I like that point, Andy. I mean, my sons couldn't watch this, and it's because of the makeup. So if there's one good thing, if there's anything that makes this a good horror movie, it's that they used the makeup and the special effects.
And those guys, the actors doing the monsters, play it straight.
Yeah.
They absolutely play it straight. Go ahead.
I lost it.
Well, let's
Okay, I think
Yeah.
that's why this movie doesn't work.
Okay, go ahead.
I think these guys. This is Lon Chaney Jr. This is Bela Lugosi. They're serious about this.
Yeah.
They pull them into this movie, and they agree to do it for whatever reason. They sign the contract, and they make the movie, and they play it straight. And I think that's why this movie doesn't work.
Do you
It
agree?
feels like two movies that
Jammed
they
together.
produce separately and then just splice in between. Because like the Abbott and Costello stuff is really goofy when they're in there, and then when it's just the monsters, it's very, very, straight.
Yeah, so that's the question about any kind of mashup movie where you bring together two different genres. It could either be two great tastes that taste great together, or it can be yuck, and you guys are saying yuck.
Yeah.
Jim, do you agree with them? Yuck?
I do. I just don't think there's Abbott and Costello are so polar opposites of the horror movie.
Yeah.
And they just don't go together. They contrast each other. They're two negatives. They don't go together at all.
Now, I'll be the contrarian on that. I have to say it works for me. I have to say that the idea of bringing together these kind of conflicting ideas, I enjoyed that. Now, I wouldn't want every movie to be that way. I wouldn't want every comedy to be that way or every horror movie to be that way. But I thought it was an interesting juxtaposition of the genres and actually enjoyed it for that. I liked that the monsters would keep the straight face while the silliness was going on. And so I think certainly there's room for disagreement there. So how about as a comedy? Does it work as a comedy at all?
It had like two funny parts.
I wrote
about her teeth. That was funny, and then other than that, it was not much.
I wrote down and highlighted the two areas in which it made me laugh. One was the bridge work joke. The last girl you fixed me up with had so much bridge work I had to pay a toll
Yeah, that's
every
great.
time
That's
I kissed
a great
her.
line.
I laughed there, and I laughed when the guy said when Lou said I only work 16 hours a day. I'm in the union. The guy says the union men work 8 hours a day. He says, well, I'm in 2 unions. I laughed there. I highlighted both of those, and that's why this does not work as a comedy for me.
And really, what it is, like half the jokes are just like Costello walks into the room and can't see everything in the room at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's like the Wolfman's behind the
It's
door,
true, that's overdone.
or they're flipping walls. Like there's nothing that's clever or original.
Now, I would say though, these guys are known for their verbal humor, and we'll listen to a little clip of them doing some verbal humor here in just a second. But I thought, out of nowhere and completely different than any other part of the movie, when Costello gets up and stands on that big box that the stuff is being, and he's like swaying back and forth, I thought that was funny.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but that just something about the way he looked and the expression on his face, that was funny to me. And then the other physical thing that I thought was, there are two other sort of related things, and they both involve doors. That revolving door thing, I know it's cliched, but I thought that was well done. And then the thing where they're stacking all the stuff up against the door to keep the monster out, and he opens it and it goes the other way. I thought that was funny.
But I knew it was coming.
Absolutely.
I knew it was coming.
The reason I didn't like this movie is for the same exact reason I don't like the show Three's Company.
Okay.
To me, I felt like I was watching an episode of Three's Company.
Yeah.
There's two people in the loop and one person always out of the loop, and it's hilarious that this one person doesn't know what's going on. What's not that funny when everybody knows what's going on except for the one person.
It's a great point. Let's listen to a little bit of Abbott and Costello and then talk about their comedy stylings.
Costello, what are you doing in the bathtub? What is Teacup doing? I'm taking a bath. What are you doing with your underwear on? The water's cold. Oh. Will you get out of that tub and put your bathrobe on? I've got the bathrobe on now. You're wearing your bathrobe in the tub? Sure, I don't want to get my suit wet. Oh, wait a minute. What are you doing in the bathtub on Thursday night? But I forgot to tell you. But Lynn Barrett, a beautiful movie star, is coming here for dinner, and I'm going to have a big swanky party. Oh, are you expecting people? Certainly I'm expecting people. What do you think I'm going to do? Have a flock of cows? Not flock, herd. Herd what? Herd of cows. Of course I heard of cows. I mean a cow herd. Well, I can have a cow herd. I'm just saying nothing to be ashamed of. All right, all right. Let's say no more about cows, please. I'm not in the mood. What mood? A cow mood. Who cares if a cow moves? If you watch
All right, now you guys laugh at that. So you think Abbott and Costello are kind of funny? Jim, kind of funny?
I do. I think they're funny. You know, they have one of the most famous comedy
Who's on
skits in all of American history, and Who's on First. And I almost feel like when they're on stage, it's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
You know, they're not scripted to
Yeah.
a movie. And it's unfortunate that comedians like that, they do things like movies that completely destroy what they can do on
So
stage.
they're funnier in this clip than they are in the movie.
Without a doubt.
Because I mean,
Absolutely.
their act was born on the stage, and
Right.
then it went to radio, and I just don't think making that jump to that third medium did him any favors.
There, you know, it's the interaction, the relationship between the two, and this is what comedy duos are really all about. That really is funny, and there's kind of less of that, other than just like you guys have already said, Abbott can't see what's going on, and Costello does. The only thing even close to that, and this is minor, and I don't know if anybody else would think this is funny, but at the very, very end, when they're in that rowboat, and he keeps saying, Let the rope go, let the rope go. That's funny. That's their interaction, but almost none of the rest of it is. Bob, what do you think?
Well, we didn't see anything in the film that was anything like what we just heard.
Yeah.
None of the wordplay, almost none of the wordplay, which is their specialty, you know, and all that was scripted out. I mean, you know, that exchange that we just listened to was all scripted out very precisely and very carefully and timed out carefully, and none of that translates into the film. So.
Well, they're trying to make it physical comedy.
Right.
And
exactly.
they're not physical comedians.
Right.
And
Nice
that
observation, yeah.
completely changes what it is.
Yeah.
It's just not who they are.
So let's talk about this. We've spent some time now talking about mashing two different genres together, this tension that occurs, two great tastes that hopefully will taste great together. Bob, you've talked now about the idea of the timing and the planning and all of that. So one of the things that we've put on our agenda for today is to talk about a lesson plan mashup. And of course, the mission behind our Popcast in general is to do professional development in an insurgent kind of way. We want to take these pop culture ideas but become better teachers and examine the MYP elements and all the things that we try to do to be good professionals. So let's see if we can do this together. Since our title is Popcast, we came up with the idea of two very different ideas, popcorn and popsicle sticks. And my question is, can you come up with the idea for a lesson plan, any social studies class you want to, utilizing the two ideas of popcorn and popsicle sticks? Give me your thoughts. Who wants to go first? Jim.
I produce an ear of corn or a bag of popcorn. And we sit and we discuss how can this bag of popcorn, being representative of corn in general, affect society. And corn, maize, has been one of the most important agrarian advancements in all of world history. I mean, it supported the economy of the Mesoamericans prior to European arrival. It was a major staple on triangular trade. So that we could talk in my class about how has popcorn, being a representative byproduct of corn, how can that affect society? How can it affect a society that has not been issued or experienced popcorn before or corn before? How could that change society? Because it could feed a populace that aren't previously fed. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry today, and I think that truly is a great discussion that could be had amongst students.
Jim has started the conversation with a wonderful point about a thematic approach to world history. We could do it in U.S. history using corn or popcorn as the theme from which we are going to apply everything else. And as we sit here and think about it, we, of course, could then look for all sorts of cross-curricular connections with economics. We could go into government. That's a great start. Thank you, Jim, for that. Bob, do you want to add to it or go in a different direction? Tell us something about popcorn, popsicle sticks. What would you do lesson plan-wise?
Oh man, this is hard. I would say this in a true mashup. If I'm mashing these two up, I would present these items. I would present popcorn and popsicle sticks to the class as props in the classroom, and I would challenge them to explain to me what popsicle sticks would tell a future historian about our society. What popcorn what do popcorn or popsicle sticks or both, what would that tell a future historian about our society, about how we consume things, what we like to eat, what we throw away, and so I'd start there.
Well, what I like about that, not only would you then get into a lot of good content, but you're not just doing history, you're doing the process of examining history. And I think from an MYP context, that's exactly what we want to do. We want to not only know the factual stuff, but we also want to know process, historiography, as it were. That's very, very good. Thank you for that.
Personally, I like the inquiry angle. I like the idea of just throwing something out there and letting them get together in groups and ask each other questions and interact with each other. And you say we came up with this idea. I have to admit that this is the first time I've actually looked at this.
All right.
I gotta say, I think popcorn and popsicle sticks, I think it's funny that these are the two that were chosen.
Yeah.
Because they show how much American culture has changed.
Tell us about that.
Because both popsicles and popcorn would be leisure activities. Industrial Revolution Americans are not eating popsicles or eating popcorn because they don't have leisure.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting how we can discuss how, it's completely changed. Light bulbs allow us to eat popcorn and popsicle sticks because more leisure time, they're nighttime activities. It's really interesting. And movies, horror movies, nighttime activities.
Well, let me say a couple of things and then feel free to jump in. And since we're doing professional development, I'll throw out a couple of obvious things. You could do a popcorn reading activity. Yeah. How about that? You could use popsicle sticks with students' names on them to randomly select to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate in the conversation. Go.
Oh, I think you guys did a great job there.
All right. Anybody want to add anything else? Bob, you had something else.
Well, one last thing. I would look at the evolution of popcorn. Popcorn popped over an open campfire 100 years ago as compared to microwave, pre-buttered, flavored popcorn in a bag today, right?
Guys, if we didn't say one other thing today, that was insurgent professional development at its finest right there.
Good job, you three.
Drop the mic.
Let's talk about the movie for just another second, and then Eston's going to talk about Halloween a little bit. So we don't think as a group that it's a good horror movie. We don't think as a group that it's a good comedy movie. But is it a well-made movie in terms of cinematography?
I think it is. I think it's well made along with the makeup.
Yeah.
Earlier, I think it is well made. I mean, I paid particular attention to the lighting, the camera focus, the makeup is done by, I happened to notice, by a guy named Bud Westmore. The Westmore family's been in Hollywood doing makeup. Michael Westmore is still in Hollywood doing makeup.
Interesting.
So I think they've got all. I just feel like they have all the right
Elements.
ingredients.
Ingredients, good.
And so it is a well-made movie, but it's awful.
I thought it was interesting how they transitioned Dracula from a person to a bat.
I love
And it
that.
actually
Animation.
went to cartoon.
Yeah.
Animation.
And I don't know my movie history, but I would assume that there are a few movies before this that used animation in a live action scene.
Yeah, fairly uncommon and definitely uncommon for the Dracula transformation. Before this, always shown with just like a puff of smoke and a stop motion kind of thing. An interesting thing, that animation sequence, also the opening credits animation sequence, done by Walter Lantz, who does the Woody Woodpecker cartoons. Because he was, that was done for Universal as well. Eston, what did you think? Well-made movie? Now I'm talking technically.
I mean, it looks good, and like you said, the lighting. There's one scene where we first turn into the Wolfman. You can see the light from the window crawling up the wall. That's a cool shot.
Yeah.
But just like I said, nothing, and it's not impossible to make a horror comedy movie. Like Shaun of the Dead is a recent movie that's a horror comedy that's actually really, really good and really funny. These guys just airballed it.
Jim, can you at least say anything positive about technically? Was it a good-looking movie, or?
Yeah, I thought for the time, I thought it impressed me. It certainly did. I think in this case, you had a lot of big name actors.
Yes.
And I think what happens a lot of time with movies when you have big name actors, they throw money at it,
Yeah.
and hoping money can solve the problems
That's a
that
good
exist within the script. It happens in movies all the time today. Get 4 big name actors together. It doesn't matter what the movie's about or whether it's any good or not. People will come see it. One thing that money can fix when it can't fix a good script is it can fix cinematography. It can fix that kind of thing. And I think it did here.
I think you raise a good point there, and we use this as another analogy and something that listeners could maybe use as lesson plan ideas, and that is something can look good, it can superficially look good, but the substance not be there. And I'm going to use your point. Throwing money at a problem is not always the way to solve it, and we can see that both in terms of the movie industry and certainly within our government as well. Eston,
What's up?
talk about Halloween.
All right. Well, one of the reasons we decided to do this was because it was close to Halloween, and that got me thinking about just all the different great things that used to happen when we were younger. And then one of the things that we had recommended years and years ago was a podcast called Mike and Tom Eat Snacks. And it's a podcast with Michael Ian Black and Tom Cavanaugh from Ed, the show Ed, if you remember that. And all they do more than that, but the
Mostly.
main thing of the show is they pick a snack, eat a snack, and rate a snack. And it is, you'd think it was stupid, but it's amazing.
It's brilliant.
And they took like a year off. And I was looking through my iTunes and I saw there's a brand new one. And so I've been listening to that on a binge. But I went and got some Halloween.
Now
candy.
you're talking.
I thought we could maybe talk about just kind of what is our favorite Halloween candy. This is a Child's Play variety pack. It has Tootsie Rolls, mini dots, Tootsie Pops, fruit rolls, all these kind of things. So I thought I'd pass them around. You can just kind of take what you like. I'm going to take the dots because I'm a fan of the
Well, this is awesome,
fruit
but what are
candy.
you guys going to have?
This is a 41-ounce bag, 2.5 pounds.
To me, the choice is easy.
What you got?
He goes
Tootsie
for
Rolls?
Tootsie Roll.
Tootsie Rolls, yeah.
Now, we don't endorse any of this. This is not good for your teeth. So any kids listening out there, we want you to be careful. Also, Eston has bought the stickiest, worst for your teeth candy that you could possibly have.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
I need to have that back,
There you go.
actually.
So going back though, do you guys have a favorite Halloween candy from back in the day?
Mine is a Kit Kat.
Okay. Why?
I think there's a number of things. Obviously, just the taste of it, and what we said about the two great tastes tasting good together. I know that's a Reese's cup, but with a Kit Kat, you've got that nice little cookie, you've got that crisp, you've got the chocolate, and I love the song always in my head. Break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar. I'll go with the Kit Kat.
Well, you, Mobley?
I'm a Reese's man. If it says Reese's anywhere on it, I'm eating it. There are Reese's products that have come and gone. Maybe no one else liked them, but I, no matter what, always loved a
Fast
Reese's
Break.
product. Fast Break, ate them all the time. That was awesome. I don't even know if they're around anymore. But the great thing about a Reese's cup, I think, is that there are so many different ways that you can eat it. I'm a just pop the whole cup in your mouth kind of a guy and chew it up. Now, my sister used to nibble around the edges and eat the middle.
Did you ever put it in the freezer?
Yeah, freezer, awesome. Absolutely. If it says Reese's, I'm eating it.
Tom, man, were there like region-specific candies like in California? Because we're all from here.
I don't think so. I mean,
I know.
everything comes from Pennsylvania.
I know
you
there's like an In-N-Out version of candy there.
Oh, I don't know, but I'll tell you what. I'm also a Reese's guy, but for a different reason. I don't like mini candy bars.
Oh.
Mini Snickers.
They're
mini
fun
Milk Duds.
size.
I don't like the fun size.
They're not fun.
It's not fun. The reason I like the Reese's cup, because all they've done is instead of putting two in a package, they've put one in a package. They haven't bamboozled you by having some smaller, second-rate, fun-size candy bar. They just gave you half of what you normally get. So I don't feel like it's anything different than what I would have gotten if I bought a candy bar myself at the store.
Favorite candy?
Reese's Peanut Butter Cup.
All
We
right.
always had a lady every year in our neighborhood. We'd go around, get some awesome candy. There was one, like a judge lived there. They'd pass out like full-size Hershey bars. That was awesome.
Yeah.
But one lady always just had a bucket of change. And so you
Interesting.
could
Take a
just take a
handful of
handful like
change.
nickels. And it was the worst
unusual.
place to go
That's
every
unusual.
year.
We got a full-size candy guy in our neighborhood, and no matter what time of year it is, whenever we drive by, my kids
handing out
always
candy.
go, that's the full-size candy bar guy.
And of course,
There.
he's on that child molestation list as well. So that's he's got that going for him.
Now, listen, the danger of Halloween, and that's, it's interesting that we have a holiday in which, we're passing out candy, but it's associated with danger, right?
Yeah.
And what about that whole thing about checking your candy? There's razor blades in it.
The Smarties are drugs.
Yeah, the Smarties are drugs. Your parents have to check your candy. Anybody ever give out apples?
Oh yeah,
yeah, can't do that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
No homemade. Anything.
There's a guy in my neighborhood, and he thinks he's funny, and he's one of these guys who has like a haunted house sort of arrangement in his garage. And he's got, every year, he's got sitting next to the candy an apple with a razor blade sticking visibly out of it. And he thinks that's hilarious. And I'm just like, dude, it's edgy,
Yeah.
but not funny. Go ahead, what's your favorite?
Favorite candy? Any gummy fruit candy. So
I can't disagree with that.
I
If it's a
love
gummy
'em.
lifesaver, I'm pretty much done.
Now the second best part of Halloween is then the costumes.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever have an awesome costume? I had one. I think it was like '92. Batman Returns came out, and I had an actual like molded rubber Batman mask.
Well, you have my Batman mask that's hanging in your room. That's my best costume of all kinds, and it's not a molded rubber one. It's the old-fashioned. Bob, what was the name of the company? It had a name. It was like some guy's name.
It's can't see, can't breathe, flammable costume
That's
company.
it. That's what I
yeah.
was trying to think of. But it's just got like the elastic thing
Yeah.
behind it, and it's
They
hanging,
just had one on Comic Book Man a couple days.
hanging in Eston Dickerson's room if you'd like to see
I had
it.
the same one when I was, probably 8 or 10 years old. The exact same one that's
This
hanging
one was
in
looked
in
like
that
I looked like
room.
Michael Keaton. It was
Yeah.
great.
Well, you know what bugs me about Halloween?
No.
Is Halloween episodes of shows.
Okay.
Two problems wrong with that. Number one, the episodes are usually not very good.
Right.
I'm reminded of, I watched the Halloween episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine this past weekend.
Ooh, don't give it away.
It's a Halloween episode. And it's
Spoiler alert.
I'm not. It's just a terrible episode because it was all about Halloween, and it bugged me.
All right.
The other thing that bugged me about Halloween episodes is they always have, I'm reminded of the show Roseanne.
Wow.
They always have
Wow.
like the most involved, crazy, ridiculous costumes on all these shows,
Yeah.
especially the sitcoms, that no normal person would ever wear. And we're supposed to watch this show and pretend that it's a normal family.
But they were supposed to be poor,
Yet they
weren't they?
spend thousands of dollars on a Marie Antoinette, Louis XVI costume. I mean, come on.
I might agree with you, except for the Gilligan's Island version, in which Gilligan is bit by a bat and then dreams that he becomes Dracula.
That's not bad.
Up to Bat is the name of that episode, by the
I
way.
like the Parks and Rec episodes. I like the Office episodes and the Community episodes that deal with Halloween. Other than that, yeah, I'm kind of with you.
Yeah.
Let's do some character studies. We're going to talk about the main characters from the movie. We want to know some history. We want to know some facts, some commentary. But we also want to have the MYP learner profile applied. We're going to start with Dracula. Take it away.
You did ask me to research Dracula. I knew nothing about Dracula. Dracula has never been an interesting figure to me. I've always been more of a Frankenstein guy, but the more I researched about this guy, the more fascinated I was with him, I have to say. Dracula as a character, not the first vampire, but certainly the best, and certainly the trendsetter. He apparently is based on a real person, Vlad the Impaler, a Romanian general. This is one of the people he's allegedly based on. He's of aristocratic heritage. His appearance, variously described, but usually pointed teeth, right? Fangs, a widow's peak, a hooked nose, pointed ears. So his appearance is fairly consistent. And he has powers. He's, in fact, almost like a superhero in many ways. He has superpowers. He has super strength. He can only be killed by decapitation and a stake through the heart, right? He has the power to hypnotize. He has telepathic powers. This is all, by the way, was exhibited in this fine film that we're reviewing. He has telepathic powers. He has been known to create a mist so he can manipulate the weather. He's a shapeshifter. He turns into a bat. In the novel, apparently, he turns into a wolf or a dog. Let's see. He has many more powers. He can disappear. He has the power to create other vampires through his bite. But like a very superhero, there are limits to his powers. One of them is daylight. Becomes less powerful in the daylight.
Pretty big limit, by the way.
Yeah. He works the night shift. He's repulsed by garlic. He's repulsed by crucifixes. He's repulsed by consecrated hosts.
So's Jim.
And so he is definitely threatened by the Roman Catholic Church, apparently. And he can only enter where invited.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
He seemed like he was just walking wherever he wanted to in this movie.
I wish that were true about most of our colleagues. When they have like an off period, but they could only come in if they were invited.
Hey, this is your prep period. You're working. Let me sit down for 40 minutes.
It's getting real personal.
Well, tell us more about Dracula.
Well, Dracula is, if I can interject.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the time or the place, but I always feel like there was an extra added part to him, especially with his relationship with women. You know, how I don't know. It's just,
He's seductive.
You see that in movies, like all movies. He's always very seductive.
Love at first bite.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, love at first bite. He's definitely wooing the women in that one.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. If you were going to do an MYP learner profile on this character, Mr. Mobley, what would you say?
Dracula's a risk taker.
Yeah?
He's a thinker, for sure. Knowledgeable, absolutely. I'm not sure about his principles, but he is principled. And he's a communicator. He's got some great communication skills, especially with that telepathy thing working.
I think he's caring.
Yeah? Why?
Because when he bites somebody, they live forever.
Yeah, that's not
He
a bad
cares.
point.
He cares for these people. Here's a great example because not Dracula, but vampires exist. And what's that Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt movie?
Kiss of the
Interview with
Vampire.
Interview with a Vampire, where they have a choice. They can either suck your blood and then you live for the rest of or forever, or they can kill you.
Yeah.
And so they make that choice. And if they're caring, they.
You know what Dracula's not on the MYP learner profile? He's not reflective because he can't see his reflection in there.
Whoa! They messed that up in the movie too.
I know they
I
did.
was so mad.
Yeah, they did.
He went
He's
to
not
bite the lady
reflective.
and he was right there.
I've been waiting all day just for that. Anything else you want to say about Dracula?
No, I think that covers it pretty well.
Okay.
He obviously has he reinvented the vampire, right? Every vampire after Dracula is based on Dracula. The Count from Sesame Street.
Yeah. Count Chocula.
Count Chocula is Dark Shadows, the TV series, then later the movie. You really can't make a vampire without going through Dracula first, that's for sure, including the 1972 blaxploitation film Blackula.
You really did a lot more research than I did.
He did great. Well, tell us what you did do. Tell us about Dr. Frankenstein and his monstrous creation.
Honestly, I really just looked up the basics that most people know. It's a book. Mary Shelley writes the book, and it comes out in 1818.
Is that right?
I
didn't realize that.
It seemed like a long time ago.
It sure
but
does.
she was just like hanging out around the fire with her friends, and they were telling stories, and out pops this Frankenstein story about the man who creates life from dead parts of the body. And then I kind of just jumped up to the movie. The movie, 1931, Boris Karloff. I'm assuming it's a huge moneymaker for Universal because they had 8 sequels, including this one. And I think it's just kind of a story that everybody generally knows the idea of. But I was looking at if you could make a lesson, like say you were a biology teacher, and you made a lesson about Frankenstein, you had to build a human and talk about the connections that you have to make, like, the joints and the arteries and the nerve system.
That's great.
And all that stuff. I think that would be pretty cool.
I'm going to shoot that over to the biology department. They need that this week.
Can you apply any of the learner profile traits to either the good doctor or the creature?
The doctor would be a risk taker. It's
Okay.
risky to try to do that. He's inquire to see if he can do it.
Yeah.
He had to think about it.
Yeah.
Probably not caring, probably not reflective or principled, or he would realize that robbing graves probably is wrong. Open-minded, it's a pretty nutty idea, so you'd have to be open-minded for that. He's knowledgeable, clearly. He knows how to put stuff together. Not balanced. Not really a communicator either, I don't think.
Yeah.
But that might be more the monster's fault, since the monster isn't capable of speech.
Now, Bob, even though you had done the research on Dracula, I know you've got a lot of thoughts on Frankenstein and his creation. Anything you'd like to say at this point?
Well, what fascinates me about Frankenstein, just the Frankenstein story, Dr. Frankenstein and his monster, is just, I think that brings up a lot of questions about the morality and the ethics of bioengineering. Mm-hmm. You could really go in some different directions with that. The ethics of science and what are our limits, and can science self-regulate? So far, I'm not impressed. We still have some 20,000 nuclear weapons around the world pointed at each other. So I think that Frankenstein itself, lends itself to a lot of questions about like that.
More so than Dracula, I think that Frankenstein, the book, and the series of movies and all the things that you guys just mentioned, I think that could be a theme for almost an entire year of a school inquiry where you talked about what you said, Eston, with the science and the connections, and Bob, the ethics and the inquiry. I just think it's right for all of
About
that.
as IB as you can get.
Yeah,
right
it
there.
really is. I really like it a lot. Let me talk about the Wolfman, and then Jim, what I'm going to do for you, I'm going to ask you to tell me which of these monsters you like the most and the least and some things like that. So I did the Wolfman. I'll say a couple of things first about Lon Chaney Jr. Lon Chaney Jr. is the only person to ever portray the Wolfman in the Universal movies, and that isn't true for any of the other monsters, so I thought that was interesting. The story of the Wolfman is kind of an inner demon thing because he gets bit by this werewolf and he gets lycanthropy, which, by the way, in the movie, Eston was kind enough to get me the Wolfman movie, the original one, and it's really weird because you're not even sure he is a Wolfman. At one point, they show the definition of lycanthropy, and it says this is a disease of the mind in which human beings believe they are wolfmen. And the way it's filmed, you're never really sure if he actually turns into a wolf or if it's all in his head. And so this Wolfman character really is all about inner demons. And Lon Chaney Jr. had inner demons. He was an alcoholic. He abused his body so much so, in fact, that when he died, they donated his body to the University of California, and it still is there. His liver and his lungs are there to demonstrate just the extreme amount of damage that you can do with alcohol and cigarettes. So I thought that was interesting. Lawrence Talbot, the character here, well, the thing that I think most about him is he actually is principled. He's got this evil within him and he knows it, but he's trying to make up for it. And so not just in this movie, but in all the movies, he's trying to stop Dracula. He's trying to stop the Frankenstein monster. And he actually thinks he's the only sane person in the room. How many times does he grab somebody by the shirt and say something like this? You don't understand. You've You've got to believe me, because nobody does. And so that's what he's all about. He's frustrated. He's cynical. He's anguished. He's repressed. And I think it's an interesting character because of that. So I'd say he's principled. He's reflective. I think he's caring. But profile words that don't even appear here. Just frustrated beyond belief.
He also had a rough go because it seemed that a full moon happened every other night in the movie, so he was just constantly turning. I don't know where they were or what season it was.
They were in Florida, and that's another thing. We were talking about it being a well-shot movie, or at least I think it is. That the Dracula's castle. Where in Florida is this castle?
Everglades.
It's kind of crazy to me.
You know, the Wolfman, one thing I noticed is that in this film, he had to see the moon to transform, it seemed like. He only transformed when he looked up and saw the moon.
I didn't notice
where
that.
the Wolfman, I thought, just turned into a werewolf, like in American Werewolf in London.
Yeah.
He's just in an apartment somewhere. He doesn't have to see the moon in order to transform.
In that first movie, not that it really matters, but it's not actually the moon. It's when this thing called the wolf's bane flower is in bloom. That's when he transforms, and so he does it more consistently. Of all the monsters, Jim, you get to pick one as being the one you think is the most interesting or intriguing to you. Who do you like?
Well, I like the hero, and to me, the Wolfman is the hero. We all have demons, and he does the best he can to fight through those demons for a greater good. And so, to me, the Wolfman is the one I admire the most.
Who do you like the least? Who's the least interesting to you?
I think the creation of Frankenstein is the least interesting.
Okay.
I almost feel in the next 100 years we'll have one of those.
No, that may be.
We've got science is well on its way to that. We've got cloning. My goodness, and who knows where we'll be with that someday. So I just don't find that really interesting at all.
Yeah.
What is interesting about that, of the three, that is by far the most culturally relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Mary Shelley. The daughter of one of the most important, one of the most important women's rights people on the globe, who, interesting, died in the birth of her child, Mary Shelley.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting about that. But to me, he's the least interesting.
All right. I'd like to do something that it seems like I probably do in every single podcast, and that's talk about Marxism. And so I think that this movie actually has a Marxist allegory in it. I'm calling it, for Halloween purposes, my gory allegory. And here's what I'm going to say. In this movie, Dracula, he's a capitalist. There's no question about it. He wants to suck our blood. He wants to suck us dry. In addition to that, he wants all of us to serve him. It's never really clear just exactly what his end game is as he tries to put Lou Costello's brain into the creature's head, but you kind of figure he's trying to plunge the world into darkness to one degree or another, and he probably wants us to serve him in some way. So he's trying to make us servants, he's trying to suck our blood, and there's that Frankenstein creation. And Jim, you said he was childlike. I think he's kind of like a laborer, like an anonymous laborer. We don't even give him a name. We call him by the name of his creator, which is like saying that guy works for Ford or that guy works for Chrysler. And he's not even totally an individual. He's made up of all these different parts. So I think
interchangeable parts.
Yeah, interchangeable parts. So I think he represents this like worker drone, and Dracula most certainly in this movie wants him to be a servant. So I think it's a Marxist allegory.
And then just to go along with it, in the first Frankenstein, he doesn't even have a voice. Like, he doesn't talk. That comes later on.
That's right.
Just add another one of your masses of workers.
Well, and this goes
voiceless.
with the whole. This goes with what we were saying earlier about that quote about the unions. And they make the jab at the unions during this. I don't know if I agree that he himself is a capitalist.
Okay.
I would think they want to disassociate themselves with that word as much as possible.
Yeah.
I see him more as a Mao. Because this is during the Chinese Civil War when this movie's made. Stalin is still premier of the Soviet Union at this time in 1948. I see him more as a Mao or a Stalinist figure, trying to create those worker bees of his people. So I completely agree it's Marxism. This is also the year of the Hollywood 10, 1948. So, of course, anybody in Hollywood wants to either get as far away from communism as possible or make it look as bad as possible. And so I think you're right. This is wholly anti-communist.
Bob, what do you think? Give us some reaction.
No, I don't think there's anything I can add to this conversation. I think you guys have covered that pretty well.
Well, since Jim has already started down this path, I think we should be looking at the year in which this movie is made, and he's done some research on this clearly, and he's going to say some other things as well. But before he goes any further, I really like what he had to say about the idea of the Hollywood 10, and then in addition to that, this is when Nixon really makes his name as a communist basher, and so that theme really presenting itself in a very vibrant kind of way. Jim, tell us more about 1948.
Well, 1948 is a big year. It's the year of the Dewey defeats Truman. Dewey defeats Truman, isn't it? Which is really in American history kind of teaches how farcical our democracy is. It's also the year that Gandhi is assassinated, which is a big deal. I don't know how relevant that was to Americans, though.
Probably
I think
not.
that's one of those where, looking back on it now, we now know how big a deal that was. I would venture to guess that in 1948, most Americans probably never even heard of him.
I think that's right.
This is really the beginning of the Cold War. That NATO and the Warsaw Pact are now solidified. We've got the Berlin airlift, so we know we're butting heads there in Berlin again. On the home front, we're anti-communist with the House Un-American Activities Committee and, of course, the Hollywood 10. When I taught U.S. history, we talked a lot about the Hollywood 10. My favorite was Dalton Trumbo, who writes, to me, the greatest anti-war novel ever. Johnny Got His Gun, right? And so it's a really interesting era in world history where we're fighting communism versus capitalism, and I really think this movie fits right into that.
Yeah, and South Korea and North Korea are both established in 1948.
Wow.
So that's more kind of Cold War stuff as well.
Absolutely. As we're talking, the Marshall Plan is instituted in 1948, and I think that's very much a Cold War thing. Not a Cold War thing. NASCAR was started in 1948. That's fascinating to me. I had no idea that it had been around that long. Eston, did you find anything you thought was interesting in 1948?
I saw some of those things. We had the first Olympics since 36, which I thought was a big deal. Again, the NHS starts over in Britain. I thought that could be a fairly big deal for them.
It is
at
big.
least. Maybe not for us, but
It is big because, back to Jim's point about the idea of this battle between communists and capitalists, this is a socialist alternative, and in a very big way.
Yep.
The State of Israel is established in 1948.
That's
and
significant.
It is significant, and also really connected to that is a movie called Gentleman's Agreement wins Best Picture in 1948. Stars Gregory Peck as a person who poses as a Jew in American society in order to experience,
Is that right?
yes, anti-Semitism, and that's
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. That's called Gentleman's
Agreement.
Do you recommend it?
I do. I recommend Gregory Peck in any film.
Okay. Apartheid started in 1948 in South Africa. I thought that was an interesting thing. Bob, a couple of science things. First monkey astronaut sent into space, and it's good for you because it's science. It's good for me because it's monkeys. The Big Bang Theory is actually presented in 1948.
And we're not talking about
going on?
Yeah, we're not talking
Not
about
the TV
that.
show.
Yeah, we're not talking about Penny.
The
Yeah, Big
Kinsey
Bang Theory.
Report is released in 1948. Television starts to be broadcast on WGN in Chicago. You mentioned the movie Gentleman's Agreement. There's another movie in 1948, Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
A fine film.
How about that?
Executive Order 9981.
Tell us about it.
Signed by Buddy Truman. Hugely unpopular at the time, but this desegregates the military by executive order.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? That's the same year that apartheid is passed in South Africa, and also the same year that Gandhi, who got his start in South Africa,
Yes.
is assassinated. What a year for segregation or desegregation.
Well, and before we go any further, again, with an MYP approach, with a theme, and trying to connect everything together, just the word segregation and all of these things, and it's just amazing to me what we would be able to do with that.
You know, with segregation, how interesting is it in the movie that one of the main characters is a woman,
Yeah.
and the woman that works for the insurance company.
Well, even the woman scientist, for that matter.
And that too, and I feel though that she's kind of a pawn of Dracula.
it's
but
true.
But the woman that works for the insurance company, she's a very important person in her company, in her business, and there she is. In 1948.
I can't believe you said that.
1948, podcast-related births. John Carpenter, born in 1948, the
That's
horror
nice.
filmmaker. Alice Cooper, born in 1948.
Very nice.
Ozzy Osbourne,
Very nice.
There you go. He used to bite the heads off of bats
known
in
for biting
concert.
heads off of bats. And last but not least, Wolf Blitzer, born in
Oh,
1948.
I like what you did there. I do have to add one. Samuel L. Jackson
Samuel L.
with
Jackson.
Snakes on a Plane.
How do you? He's not the same age as all those people. Like he looks so much better than them.
But you know who the scariest person born in 1948? Clarence Thomas.
He hasn't spoken since.
Jerry Mathers was born in 1948.
The beaver?
Yeah. Prince Charles was born in 1948. Here's some people who died in 1948. Babe Ruth, Three Finger Brown, Mordecai Three Finger Brown, a pitcher for the Chicago Cubs who literally had only three fingers.
It's true.
Orville Wright died in 1948.
Popcorn.
Here's a name.
Oh, that's Orville Redenbacher.
But Orville, we could do an MYP year theme on the name Orville and everything related to that.
All two of them.
Bob, I'm going to ask you about somebody here. Here's somebody maybe we don't know. Kathleen Kennedy. She dies in 1948. Why is that significant?
She's she is actually John F. Kennedy's sister. Kick, they called her, as
Yeah.
a matter of fact. I hate it when he springs stuff on you like that. She died in a plane crash.
Yeah.
And interesting that her brother Job had died in a plane crash during the war. So
She's not the frontal lobotomy one.
No, that's
No,
Rosemary.
that's Rosemary.
And that's much later.
yeah.
But this just is another one of the nascent steps in the progression of that Kennedy tragedy story, 1948.
For sure.